Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This is a YA historical fiction fantasy novel set in Khorasan, which is an ancient region in the Middle East. It's a retelling of 1001 Arabian Nights. The main character, Shahrazad, becomes the wife of the Caliph, who's known for marrying a new wife every day and killing them every morning at dawn. He had previously married and killed Shahrazad's best friend, and Shahrazad is determined to break the streak and kill the Caliph. I gave this book 3 stars. There were a number of things that I really liked about it, but it had too many flaws for me to really consider this a book that I thoroughly enjoy, although I do think I plan to continue on and read the second book in the duology. To start with a positive, the writing style in this flowed very smoothly. I thought it was very pretty at the beginning, and I was unsure if it was going to be pretty with a purpose or not, and I'm still not entirely sure that it was, but it did flow incredibly smoothly. I would pick up this book to read 4 chapters because I was buddy reading this with Abby McReads, and I would just immediately fly through them. It felt like it went by so fast. I never had an issue reading it. And it wasn't that I was reading it faster than normal, because I did time myself at one point. And it was about my average reading pace, maybe a little bit faster. But it was just that it felt like it went by so fast. It felt like a minute or two and I'd be 50 pages later. And this whole book felt like that for me. And I do think that's very much a positive. Reading it never felt like work. And I think that's the overall reason why I gave it 3 stars. Even with all its flaws, the actual reading experience was quite enjoyable. But there were a number of flaws. At the beginning, it was very, very jumpy. It switched between characters and scenes a lot. Not only were we with Shahrazad, but we were also with her father and her sister and her former love interest. And it felt like there was too much going on and it all went by too quickly. That did smooth out later on in the book, and we were allowed more time with each of the characters, so I appreciated that. But at the very beginning, I was very, very confused, and I believe Abby felt the same way as I did. I also felt like Renee Ahdieh didn't want to tell anything in this book. Like, she spent a great deal of time trying to show everything and trying to avoid just straight telling the reader any information, which is admirable to a point, but I do need to know things within the story. I felt like I had trouble determining the characters' relationships with each other because she wouldn't come out and say that Shiva was Tariq's cousin or anything like that. She would just go about it in a very roundabout way that was incredibly confusing to read, and I do think she would have had more success if she'd been just a little bit more straightforward with some things. I do like to be shown things in books. That's very much a plus, and I do like that she tried that. But I think she went a little bit overboard when she just wouldn't say, oh, that's Tariq's cousin Shiva, or things like that, because I was very confused. I think Abby and I had like a list of characters going because we had trouble remembering them and their roles in the story. The premise is the 1001 Arabian Nights story, and I like that. That was very original. I don't think I've ever seen any retellings of that. But when Shahrazad was actually telling her stories to the king, they were told through dialogue, which I really didn't like. We were just getting her literal dialogue of her telling the story to the king. Well, the Caliph. He's the leader of the empire, the country, whatever it's called. But his official role is Caliph, not king. But because we were getting those stories through dialogue, it never felt like we were immersed in them, and it made the stories themselves feel weaker. I really didn't understand why the king wouldn't kill her, because it was just like some generic story that I was having trouble not skimming through. I don't remember any of the stories that she told the king at all. I remember her referencing Aladdin at one point, so I'm sure that was one of the stories, but apart from that, I couldn't tell you anything about them. And I do think that caused a little bit of disbelief, just like he's breaking all of his rules to keep this girl alive because she's telling him stories that are pretty boring and uninteresting. So I do think if there'd maybe been a cutscene into the story instead of just having Shahrazad's dialogue, that would have worked better. There's a reason why when movies do that, like when The Princess Bride did that, they'd have like a few lines of dialogue and then they'd just go into the world of the story that was being told, because that's a lot more immersive for the audience or the reader. And I don't think that worked well in here with her just telling it through dialogue. I had a number of issues with the romance in this book, particularly between Shahrazad and the Caliph. They do fall in love. I don't think that's a spoiler. It's in the description that she starts to realize she has feelings for him. But she realizes that she has feelings for him very fast after spending almost no time with him. they're talking about love. She's talking about how she could never kill him, even though that was her goal in the beginning. And it did feel like very insta-lovey for me. It felt like there was no build up to that relationship. It just sort of happened all of a sudden and they were madly in love. And I wanted to be invested in that relationship because it did seem like it could have been an interesting dynamic considering he'd killed her best friend and there was a lot of depth there and discussions into why and what his feelings were on the subject. But because it happened so fast, it just felt very flat and very fake, and I couldn't get invested. The other issue I had was that everyone kept talking about how the Caliph had never really experienced love in his life. His mother was killed when he was very young, and his father spent essentially the next 10 years of his childhood punishing him for his mother's affair. And people would tell Shahrazad, oh, like the king needs your love, you can heal him with your love. And that made me very uncomfortable because he's literally just murdering all these women. And it's not Shahrazad's job to risk her life, risk her mental health, but mostly her life because she's in this very difficult situation, to make him feel love, to heal him with her love. Like, that's not how it works. And the fact that there were several characters pushing her into that and literally saying those things to her, like, oh, if you love him, you could heal him, you could make him better. Like, that's not how that works. And that made me very uncomfortable in this book. I thought it could have been dealt with better. I'm not against that being discussed in a book because I think that could be a very interesting topic. But within the context of this particular story, I don't think it was handled very well. Overall, my last major issue is just that I forgot this so quickly. I was buddy reading it with Abby, and we were reading 4 chapters a day for the most part, and I would read them the night before, and by the time morning came and we were discussing it, I'd have forgotten most of what happened, and I'd have to go back to refresh myself just to be able to talk about it. And I think she felt a similar way. Like, I did enjoy it while reading it, but then I'd put it down even for an hour or two, and it would just completely go out of my head. I'm filming this review the day after I finished it because I was so worried if I waited any longer, I just wouldn't have anything to say. And even now, I have to rely heavily on my notes because a lot of it is just gone. Like, the story never really stuck in my head at all. It's gonna be gone super fast. I'm worried that by the time I pick up the sequel, I'm just gonna have forgotten this first story entirely. So I hope there's some sort of recap at the beginning of that book. But it did get 3 stars from me. I did enjoy it a fair amount when I was reading it, despite all the issues I had. It was a pretty enjoyable read. The writing flowed really well. And if the writing flows well, I feel like it's accomplished most of what it's trying to do for me. I'll forgive a lot of story flaws for just really enjoyable writing. I do think if I'd had any troubles with the writing at all, this would have been a 2-star read. It was just barely 3 stars for me, but I'm hoping the sequel is better. Let me know down below if you've read this book or any of Renee Ahdieh's other books, especially the sequel to this, because I'm kind of curious how you found the sequel, if you enjoyed this book or not. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again soon.